Thanks, Jeff, for the intro, and Brendan, I think he's gone. So that was a great talk and a great introduction to some of the topics we'll talk about for the rest of the workshop. My name's Doug Miller. I've been a consultant, independent consultant for the last 12 years, really focused in the areas of cloud computing, cross-platform interoperability, identity management, and looking at it from both the technology point of view as well as how it impacts privacy and security. Before that, I worked at Microsoft for 5 years and been in this industry for, over 30 years, started out as a Unix programmer. And I've sort of seen all the different waves that have happened in technology and server computing platforms and now cloud computing. So what I'm going to be talking about today is really the cloud and both the good and the bad and some of the challenges that we have related to compliance. Greg and others will talk about some of the nitty-gritty of compliance in the cloud. But I wanted to sort of start with a kind of a reference point of what is the cloud opportunity. I think we all recognize it's kind of inevitable. What is the cloud? And it may seem obvious, but it's probably worth having the discussion. Where is the cloud, which becomes important when you're talking about compliance and whose laws apply, and then some of the particular challenges related to compliance in the cloud. So an interesting number here, 89% of enterprises will be using cloud services by the end of this year. That's a pretty amazing number when you think about cloud computing hasn't been around that long. And cloud is a little different than a lot of technology evolutions that we've had. If you look back at server computing and client-server computing and the various models that have come about, most of them have been very technical. They've been things that computer scientists and computer engineers are focused on working with in order to provide some sort of solution for a business. The big difference with cloud is it's so simple. And it provides so many economic benefits as well as complexity, reducing complexity benefits, that just about anybody can jump on the cloud now. And in fact, one thing that is concerning probably a lot of people in the room is who is using the cloud inside my organization? Who's using a cloud that I haven't sanctioned? How many people have a Dropbox account, but it's not offered by their organizations, just somewhere where they store files. Sometimes these are sensitive files. So all of these kind of raise questions about compliance. How do we kind of adopt the cloud, get all the benefits, but also have some control over it? So some of the benefits, of course, the idea of being able to scale up, scale down as you need compute resources and pay for what you use as opposed to investing in a whole lot of computers and data centers. And the ability to hand off the complexity to a cloud vendor. And when you think about it, most businesses are not IT businesses. They're hospitals or insurance companies or banks or whatever. They don't want to spend their whole time administering IT. They just want to get on with their business. So the idea of this model where you hand off the complexity and the IT management to people who do that for a living has huge attraction for businesses of all size. Whether you're a little small business wanting to outsource your email, or whether you're a large corporation wanting to do, for instance, business analytics and a large amount of data. So all of these are big drivers, but there are concerns that are still there. And many of those concerns are over trust. Who has access to my data? How will it be used? What happens if the data is breached? Can the cloud provider provide better security than I can? And can the cloud provider provide better compliance with all the rules and regulations that I need to comply with in order to do my business? So we'll go through some of these questions and answers throughout the rest of the sessions today. And just look at, before we sort of leave the opportunity, look at what some of the analysts are saying about the cloud. If you're resisting cloud because of security concerns, you're running out of excuses. And so basically we're now at the point where cloud vendors, any of the big cloud vendors, can offer better security than what many of us can do, regardless of the size of our organization. The question is no longer, how do I move to the cloud? Instead, it's now I'm in the cloud, how do I make sure I've optimized my investment and risk exposure? And so that's a big question. You know, a lot of people talk about the idea of transferring risk. If you go to the cloud, you can transfer some of your risk to the cloud provider if they're taking responsibility for things like compliance with regulations. By 2020, we will stop referring to the public cloud and the private cloud. We'll simply talk about it as the way of doing business. And you know, right now we sort of talk about different models of cloud computing, but ultimately it's just going to be a service that we sign up for, and we won't think about the particular underlying technology that actually gets us there. I wanted to highlight this study just for a sec. It's a little hard to read the text, and I will blow up kind of the important point there. But this is a study that Microsoft just commissioned with Forrester, and it hasn't been published yet, so I had to get special permission to be able to show you this one slide. But what it is, you know, the drivers, why are people thinking about cloud? And, you know, you probably can't read the reasons here, and it's kind of good for a way, in a way, because probably 3 years ago, the major driver for going to the cloud was saving money, reducing complexity. And so you'd expect that to be the number one answer. But in fact, what is the most important, very important or important reason for going to the cloud is improved security and or the ability to meet compliance regulations. So that's now bubbled up to the top as the most important driver for organizations moving to the cloud. So, you know, this is a slide you can show to your management. You know, if they're saying, well, is anybody really going to the cloud? Do people really trust the cloud? This says a lot about how far the cloud has come from a trust point of view from where it started just a few years ago. So a very important statistic here from over 400 organizations that were polled in this particular survey. So, you know, you get the question, what is the cloud? And you know, most of you go, yeah, I know what the cloud is. You don't need to talk about that. Don't waste my time. Well, I won't spend a whole lot of time on these slides, but I think it's worth having the conversation just to make sure we're all using the same language when we think about the cloud. And hopefully you can take some of these slides if you need them when you're educating your own staff or if you're making presentations to your management. If they say, well, what the heck is the cloud? Maybe some of these slides can be useful. So I'm going to start with the standard NIST definition. This was a definition NIST put out several years ago, and it's actually held up pretty well. And what, you know, I'll give you a chance to read it, but what I've done here is underline some of the most important aspects of cloud that really are not just the technical attributes, but they're also the key benefits of why people go to the cloud. The idea of ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to whatever service that you're signing up for, whether it's a payroll service, whether it's charging a credit card, whether it's getting access to your files or email, it's something that you can get whenever you need it. And this idea of a pool of configurable computing resources that can expand and contract as you need them. So you only pay for what you need, regardless of whether it's network bandwidth, servers, server compute time, storage, and that sort of thing. Can be rapidly provisioned. This is a key differentiator between other types of on-premises computing. The idea that, okay, I need to spin up a virtual machine to do a particular job. You can do that literally within minutes, use that virtual machine for whatever purpose you need, and then turn it off. Only pay for the compute time you need. And you can do that with minimal effort. So this is one of the biggest attractions, I think, for smaller businesses and less IT-oriented businesses, is they don't have to be computer scientists to be able to use the cloud. There are cloud models that consist of 5 essential characteristics, and we'll go through these, 3 service models and 4 deployment models. This was back in the old NIST definition. Most people would say, hey, we've gone way beyond that. There are a lot more models, but this is a good place to start because literally when you start thinking about as a service models, you know, there are new ones appearing every single day. So the essential cloud characteristics, and again, these are some of the biggest benefits. The idea of on-demand self-service, broad network access, so you can be anywhere in the world and be able to get access, assuming that you have internet access to your services. The idea of resource pooling and be able to share resources. Rapid elasticity, the idea of being able to rapidly expand. Somebody like the IRS, when it comes to tax time, they need a lot of compute power. Well, they can expand to whatever size they need, virtually infinite compute power, and then contract back down when the tax season is done. And then the idea of a measured service, the idea that you only have to pay for what you use. And rather than having to invest in a lot of compute resources, you basically just pay for the compute time that you use that's owned by the cloud service provider. So the service models, again, the service models is kind of almost becoming an infinite list, but the three big ones are software as a service. So when you think about software as a service, things like Office 365, the ability to deliver software as a service from the cloud. And it's not just email, could be, your Word or Excel session is delivered as a cloud session. Google Apps, another big example of software as a service, and Salesforce, of course, one of the early pioneers of the idea of being able to deliver a very robust enterprise application without the need for any software being installed on your computer. We also have things that are appearing, things like email as a service, but really is part of the idea of software as a service. We have platform as a service. This is the idea, of course, of using the cloud as essentially a computer. You can program that thing and basically write applications that make use of the resources that are in the cloud. And so we have Microsoft Azure, of course, as well as Google App Engine and other models out there for being able to program and write applications to the cloud. And then the other big one is infrastructure as a service. Folks like Amazon, Microsoft, even Dropbox, when you think about the idea of infrastructure being even a virtual hard drive. These are folks that are offering virtual computers that you can ramp up quickly in the form of virtual machines, for example, and be able to do whatever computing you need there. And then we have other as-a-service offerings coming along, things like identity as a service. So rather than having to maintain your own, for instance, Active Directory servers on premises, you can actually do that as a cloud service. And we'll walk through some examples of some of these in a sec. We have four main deployment models. We have public cloud, private cloud, community cloud, and hybrid cloud. Public cloud initially started out as something that people stayed away from. They thought, gee, like Gmail, I don't really want to use the same infrastructure Google uses for Gmail for my business applications. Well, a lot has happened in the last couple of years, and people are beginning to really trust the public cloud, and that's where you're going to get the biggest economic benefits as well as the biggest benefits for reducing complexity. But we also have the option for private cloud, the idea of taking everything that's in the public cloud, putting it in a box, and then being able to install that on your own servers and storage systems and whatever in your own data center. A good example of that is the Azure Stack. And basically what Microsoft's done is taken all of the software that they use to run their public cloud and make that available to organizations to be able to install in their own data center and be able to use that for running essentially their own private version of the public cloud behind their own firewall. And again, we'll look at what the difference is between that and just standard on-premises computing, but again, always keep those characteristics in mind in order to really think about it as a cloud. We have community cloud. That's where a cluster of different folks who have similar interests or security concerns or privacy concerns can get together and have their own community cloud. The best example here would be the government cloud here in the US. Many of the cloud vendors have data centers specifically focused for government customers, and that's what they sign up to. And so they're using a cloud data center system that's totally isolated from the public cloud where other businesses or even individuals could be using the services. And then hybrid is essentially a mix of any of the previous three, where you may be doing public cloud for some stuff, private cloud for other, and having them talk together and work together. And of course, we also have the possibility of cloud working with our on-premises systems. And I'll talk about that a little bit. The idea that you may want to keep some of your systems on premises for whatever reason. And they're not traditional cloud services. they're traditional on-premises, maybe client-server computing. And one of the biggest reasons there is maybe you already have all the systems, it's working, it's all paid off, great, response time when people are using the service, so you don't want to rip that all out. But you may want to use services there, for instance, maybe billing, that's a cloud service, and so you can tie those together, use the cloud where it makes sense, and be able to still leverage your investments on premises. So the other thing to look at is what is not a cloud. These are different technologies here that can exist both on premises and in the cloud, but aren't necessarily cloud computing. Things like outsourced IT or remote data centers. This just could be you've hired IBM to basically run your data center for you. Well, it's not necessarily cloud computing, it's just basically on premises, but in a different place. Virtual machines, again, if you're manually setting up your own virtual machines and doing the software images and everything else, it's hard work. That's not, you don't get the benefits of what you get from sort of the auto provision capabilities from most of the cloud vendors. And on and on. So there's a variety of different classes of types of apps and services that you may be using today, and you think, oh, that's cloud. I've got internet-based email, it must be cloud. Well, not necessarily if you're the person who's having to administer that system. So the big differentiator, again, when you're thinking about cloud, are on-demand self-service, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and measured service. So those are the key things that you should think about when you're looking at these and thinking, okay, have I got all these characteristics in my internet-based email, for example? So I wanted to walk through a couple of examples, just make sure everybody's sort of on the same page with these. Here's an example of a multi-tenant public cloud. So you could think of Google Apps or Office 365. So in this case, we might have 3 different types of cloud services: software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And these are all hosted in the same cloud infrastructure where multiple customers, say worker 1 from company A, and we have worker 1 from company B, are both writing applications using the platform services of the cloud, but they're completely isolated from each other, so they don't actually know that there's another company using those same services. We could also have, for instance, multiple folks using the same email system hosted in the cloud, but one might be in Europe and one might be in Asia, but they're using the same service that's distributed throughout the cloud. And then possibly a third customer that's over here running infrastructure as a service, maybe spinning up some virtual machines for various tasks. So that's your typical multi-tenant public cloud. If you look at a typical private cloud, it looks an awful lot the same. The big difference here is that all of this is built behind your corporate firewall typically, and all of the people that are using this are your employees or people who work in your organization. So you're not doing any sharing. All of this is happening within your own organization, but you still get the benefits of the cloud. You can spin up resources, move them around, auto provision, virtual machines, that sort of thing, and use the cloud just like you could in the public cloud, but do it behind your own firewall. So the other big question you get is, well, how does cloud really differ from on-premises computing? So this is just a very simple example of on-premises. We've got our corporate headquarters here. We have a data center inside the organization where we might have some file sharing systems. We might have some email systems. And then we have users inside the main office on terminals and laptops and whatever accessing these systems. But we also offer the ability for our remote offices, mobile users, and home users to be able to VPN or directly connect to our services on premises. So this typically involves a CapEx funding. So this means you're buying lots of servers and software, you're installing it in a data center, maybe you're renting the space at the data center, but this is a fairly large outlay of capital. The compute resources are usually managed by you, or they're managed by somebody that you've hired, but you're responsible for all of the management of those systems. And you retain full control over all the apps and the data. So that's kind of where we historically had been for the last couple of decades. If we look at cloud computing, what we have here is that the cloud service provider has basically provided the cloud servers and infrastructure that you need to carry on your business and expose the compute power and storage power and networking power through the various cloud service models. And then all of your offices, including your headquarters, your mobile users, home users, whatever, connect to these services over the internet using a trusted connection of some type. And again, in this case, we're using more of an OpEx model where you're renting the service. You're paying per month, and it's not just a flat fee per month, but paying for the cycles that you're actually consuming. And so for a lot of organizations, this is hugely attractive because it's much easier to manage budgets this way rather than trying to amortize the purchase of computers and that sort of thing over many years. And also in this case, these servers here are managed by the cloud service provider. You don't even care how many servers are there or what type of storage they use because it's all exposed to you simply as a service. And then the control and access to the data, even though it's being run by this organization over here, all of the big vendors are super focused on making sure that there's no compromise on privacy or security. And so, if anything, this model will be more private, more secure than typically what you can do on your own. And if you look at a lot of the big breaches that have happened, many of them have happened from companies that had this model, the old on-premises compute model, not so much in the cloud compute model where people who have been dealing with the great big vendors, they typically are much more secure or private than they were when they were doing it themselves. Going sort of a level deeper and looking at email as an example, looking at on-premises versus cloud. So, historically, if you had something like an Exchange server, an email server, it might be a Linux server, whatever, on premises, you would install that software on a server here, and your users would maybe authenticate with some sort of identity management system. In this case, we're talking about Exchange, so it would be Active Directory. They'd authenticate and then access the services directly on the server that's managed inside the corporate data center that's owned by the organization. And then the email gets fired off to the internet this way, and this connection to the internet is managed by the organization as well. So in the cloud-based Exchange Online model, it might look more complex, but it's actually more straightforward in that all of this part here is all managed by Microsoft, including the connection to the internet, secure connection to the internet, managing the Exchange servers, and then as well handling the authentication of users. And so users simply connect to the service. They may authenticate locally, or they may authenticate through a cloud-based authentication system, which is synchronized. But basically, they just connect to the service, do their email, and then that gets fired out to the internet that way. So the overhead of managing these two models, very, very little overhead here, a lot of overhead here of trying to manage your own Exchange servers. So just a fairly simplistic example. Wanted to spend just a couple of minutes and talk about where is the cloud. We get this question a lot, and so if you think about what cloud data centers used to look like, they look just like regular old data centers. They were data centers with racks and racks of computers and storage, lots of network cables here, and they seem to go on forever. And if you wanted to add more compute power, you brought in some more servers, you put them in the rack, brought in some more storage, put it in the rack, did all the cabling. And it was a lot of overhead for the cloud providers. And to be honest, a lot of them didn't make a lot of money doing this. But now we've actually moved to a new model for a lot of the modern providers. There's a picture of one of Microsoft's data centers. And what we have here is these modules, right here is an example of one, that basically can be dropped anywhere in the world as a single compute unit for cloud computing. And you literally plug it into the power, you take a garden hose and plug it into the water to get water cooling, and then plug it into the network. And they can be configured automatically to basically join the cloud and offer their services up. So a lot less overhead for the people who are managing these data centers. And then also a lot more flexibility. If you're operating in a data center, you have a way too much capacity and nobody's ever going to use it, you can pick one of these up, put it on a freight train and move it to the other data center where maybe you did need it. So a lot of innovation going on behind the scenes. I tried to get a tour of one of the Microsoft Cloud data centers, but they wouldn't let me in. But you can go online and just type in a search for Microsoft Virtual Data Center Tour. And they have a very cool interactive data center tour that you can go through and see, kind of some of these new innovations that are going on. So this is a picture of Microsoft's global data centers. Amazon would have a very similar picture, Google, others. But as you can see, we've come a long way in the last couple of years from just a couple of data centers to data centers all over the world, and more coming online all the time. The green ones are new ones that are coming on in Canada, some new ones in Europe. And it's not just adding new data centers. As Brendan mentioned, there's kind of a new model that's being tested out, the idea of using trustees to manage the data center so that Microsoft can take themselves out of the chain, if you like. If there's a warrant that comes down and says, we want the data in that data center, they say, it's not our data center. Well, we own it, but we don't run it, and we don't have a way to get access to that data. You need to contact the local law enforcement authorities and have them submit a subpoena to the people who operate it in a lawful way in that country. So a very creative way to sort of help protect customer data even more than they have been doing in the past. So, a lot of expansion going on to really meet customer demand. So I wanted to spend a few minutes and talk about compliance in the cloud. I am not the compliance expert. Greg is over there, and he'll be talking in gory detail on some of the compliance challenges. But I wanted to give you a little overview and really just kind of emphasize this whole idea that trying to manage compliance, especially if you're a multinational organization, is really, really hard to do on your own. It's not just that there are a whole lot of standards out there, but they're constantly changing. And you guys know better than just about anybody in the world, what happened in Europe, with Safe Harbor going away, and then, I guess we use model clauses now, and then, now we have Privacy Shield. Well, if you're an individual organization trying to navigate through all of those challenges, it can be hugely complicated and time-consuming and consume a lot of your resources. So you really want to make sure that, when you're going to the cloud, go with somebody who can help offload a lot of that complexity and do that work for you. And, we actually, we use the term, the idea of a compliance decision maker. We got your business decision maker and technical decision maker, but a compliance business decision maker who's in the chain of approval for new technology, and they go, I'm overwhelmed. I can't believe that this cloud provider is going to look after our ability to meet this regulation to do our business in China, or whether it's going to be in New Zealand or wherever. And so they'll say, look, we got to slow down. We can't jump to the cloud. We already kind of have it sort of figured out. But and so we see a lot of people who are trying to nix the idea of going to the cloud. In fact, one example, if I can just use this for a second, there was a law firm here in the States, and they were looking to go to the cloud, and their own legal counsel said, no, you can't do that, because if you put client data up in the cloud, you're going to violate attorney-client privilege. And they passed that information back, and this was a Microsoft salesperson who was trying to sell Microsoft cloud services. And they came back and said, hey, can you guys help us at all? Well, so we actually did some research on this. We got some really smart people like Dan Soloff, to go and dive down into the issue and really find out the answer. Will you lose attorney-client privilege if you store sensitive client data up in the cloud? In fact, there's been lots of rulings on this already, and the American Bar Association has said, no, if you follow very strict rules about how you treat the data and who has access to it, you can use the cloud for storing client data without violating attorney-client privilege. So that's kind of an example of trying to grapple with some of these challenges and overcome some of the misperceptions that are out there related to cloud computing. So we sort of think of compliance with standards in the cloud in three big buckets. And again, I'm not a compliance expert, but it certainly makes it easier for me to understand. But the idea of broad cross-industry international standards that are out there that everybody should care about and that every cloud provider, frankly, should be providing support for. And a lot of these aren't just sort of checklist items. If you focus in on one here, the 27018, ISO 27018, this was really brought about by people really concerned about what is going on with my data when I hand it over to a cloud provider. I want to have an assurance that that data is not being used for advertising or marketing or shared with other customers or whatever. I want not just an assurance, I want a standard that I can see, okay, that provider complies with the standard, therefore I know there's kind of a code of practice in place that will protect my data when it gets used by the provider of the services, but not used by anybody else. And essentially it's protecting the data only for the use that you intended it for. So there's a lot of different standards out there that really are international standards, impact everybody. And then we kind of have two other groups. We have vertical standards and regulations that impact different industries: healthcare, manufacturing, education, financial services, government, law enforcement. We'll hear a little more about some of the challenges with law enforcement a little later on from Jenner. But each of these industries have their own specific standards, and we have to be able to comply with these in order to play in the industry. If you want to offer education services, you've got to comply with FERPA and that sort of thing. So, we've got all of these to worry about. Again, a big task if you're trying to do this on your own. And then we have regional standards. And so if you're a multinational company or organization, you not only have to worry about, complying with regulations here in the US, but, of course, Europe has lots of issues. But so do lots of other countries, and more countries are jumping on board with establishing their own standards and regulations. And you got to keep pace with all of those as they come on stream if you want to do business in those countries. And in some cases, we have a mix of both the vertical and the international. For instance, in the UK, you have GovCloud, which is sort of a set of requirements for dealing with offering cloud services to the UK government. So, it's a fairly complicated set of standards that may or may not apply to your business. And again, going with a cloud provider who's kind of figured this all out is hugely important if you really want to take advantage of the cloud. So, basically what a compliant cloud offers, I was talking to some folks who talk to people like yourselves a lot, and the one thing that kept bubbling up was the idea of risk. How can I manage risk? How can I transfer risk? And so if you can feel comfortable transferring some of your compliance risk to a cloud provider, that will help you, sleep at night. We also, of course, have to make sure that we're respecting rules that are imposed on us to participate in certain types of industries. Even something as simple as taking a credit card. Obviously, PCI rules coming into play, and you need to keep that information confidential in a way that complies with the regulations. So the whole idea here is to sort of lower your risk profile and offload a lot of that compliance work over to a cloud service provider. I wanted to just take a sec on what a compliant cloud looks like in real time. So this is just I have an Office 365 and Azure account myself for my own little business. And one of the new things that have been added for an Office 365 customer is the ability to go into a security and compliance portal that you manage. And so this is very cool. You can go through all the various attributes here. We have alerts, permissions, security policies, data management, search and investigation. So this one, for example, permissions, and this is one thing to really keep in mind is that compliance in the cloud is a shared responsibility. You know, Microsoft provides this tool, Amazon will have their tools, Google will have their tools, but it's up to you to actually use these tools and use them appropriately. So for example, you know, for compliance administrator, I can set up a role-based identity for your compliance administrators and join people to that role based on their need to be able to be involved in the compliance of your organization. And some of the things that these, you know, that person would have control over, or the group of people, would be, you know, the ability to, you know, manage the other members within it, do data loss prevention reports, that sort of thing, retention policies, and all of that sort of stuff. So in this case, we have a bunch of different roles, a little hard to read, I'm kind of squinting, but that you can assign to help manage the compliance of your organization. Another page that comes up here, for example, is if I want to, you know, let's say my boss came in and says, can you actually prove that we're PCI compliant? Can you give me something that'll actually, I can take and show to the board to show them that we're doing this the right way? So we have a resource area as part of your customer service here that's based on your business. You actually answer a couple of questions about the type of business that you're in, and then it offers a whole list of the various reports that you can go and grab and print out and hand to your management to show them, yes, we do comply. So that's kind of what the new world of compliance looks like in the cloud. A lot of this work's already been done for you. You don't have to go out and start scrambling and worrying about a lot of these standards and doing it yourself. So just a couple of things I wanted to, you know, talk about at the end here is the idea that, you know, regardless of the type of architecture that you want to use, you should be able to have choice with your cloud vendor to be able to do private cloud, public cloud, or maybe a mix of both. It was kind of interesting with private cloud. There was an article that was published a couple of months ago in InfoWorld. David Lithicum, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I think the title of it was something like, you know, Microsoft Azure for private cloud is dead on arrival or something. And a lot of the points he made didn't really make a lot of sense, but what was really fascinating is all these people like yourselves piling on with comments saying, no, we actually like this idea. We like the option to be able to build our own private cloud if we really feel like we absolutely have to. We won't necessarily use it, but the idea that it's there is really super comforting to know that we could build our own private cloud in our own existing data center if we felt like we really had to for a particularly sensitive type of workload. So, you know, if you have super sensitive data or applications, the option to build your own private cloud and still have the cloud benefits is always there. A lot of people go with public cloud because that's where you get the maximum economic benefit and the least amount of complexity. And, you know, people originally were kind of, I'm not sure about public clouds, you know, who's going to get access to that data? Will it be used for something else? Well, people are feeling more and more comfortable, as those survey results showed, about the idea of using public cloud. And if you look at a lot of the reports that are coming out now, public cloud is really just exploding in use, much more so than just about any other type of cloud architecture. But you also have the option here that you could do a hybrid cloud, a bit of mix of both, where you have maybe some services in a workload running in private and some working in public, and maybe even some working on premises. And so, you know, one thing to really look for is the idea of, you know, whichever one you choose, you should have a consistent platform across all of these different architectures and the same type of tools and the same type of management concepts, and be able to do it in a way that's, you know, much simpler than it would have been if you were setting up your own data centers for these types of workloads. So that's what I had to say. I'm happy to take any questions, and we have lots of other experts here who can answer questions that I probably can't answer, but yeah.
Questions, we've got about 10 minutes, I think, before our coffee break. No law says we can't go early to coffee break, but
Okay, my name is Rudy Guyon. I'm with Intel Security. I had a question about vendor responsibility for meeting compliance standards. You said that the customer has to use the tools properly, but how much responsibility will the vendors take on for keeping their tools compliant? For example, if they built something that was opt-out and a regulation changed and it had to be opt-in in a certain region and they
Right.
failed to do that, would they take on responsibility? Were they going to disclaim that kind of thing? How's that? What's the standard now?
Well, I can't answer on behalf of any of the vendors, but I think one of the things that they do is worry about that, you know, day in and day out. If you look at Microsoft, for example, I think there's 1,000 lawyers and policymakers in there that are looking at this, coupled with engineers who are trying to figure out how to implement a particular type of new policy. A good example is what happened with in Europe. You know, from my understanding, you know, the folks inside Microsoft could see that, you know, the safe harbor system was in trouble. It was only a matter of days, and literally a couple of years before it fell apart, has started working through the idea of EU model clauses, and literally went to every single jurisdiction and got those in place so that if safe harbor went away, you know, there would still be a model for being able to have their customers carry on business. In fact, safe harbor went away, and, you know, fortunately there was that safety net there that allowed customers to carry on with their business. Then, you know, obviously Microsoft, Amazon, Google, IBM, all of the major vendors were very interested to see what was going to happen with Privacy Shield. Were deeply involved, and of course, you know, people like Microsoft were first in line to sign up for Privacy Shield in order to be able to track those changes and make sure that they're in place for customers. So that's one example, but you know, I think if you don't have that level of trust, you're not going to have the customers. And so if you start ignoring standards and ignoring compliance, customers will go elsewhere. There's a lot of competition in the space right now and a lot of good companies.
Thank you for that definition of private cloud, because I never understood it until you explained that it was basically the infrastructure of the cloud copied into a private server set, or, you know, something where there's more of a boundary, I suppose. My question is, other than the private cloud, with the, I'm looking at this from a federal government perspective, and also someone has a security background, IT security background. One of the most important parts of getting a certified authorization to operate is that you have to have a boundary of the system, and you say, this is ours, this is theirs, this is what I'm responsible for. And I just don't see how you can do that in the cloud when server could be anywhere in the world. How has that problem been dealt with?
So in that particular example, you know, one way to do it, you know, certainly what Microsoft had done and Amazon have also done, is build a community cloud that is built specifically for those requirements of that customer set. A good example is one that we were quite involved in, is CJIS, the Criminal Justice Information System Standards. And Jenner's going to talk about that, but the idea of, you know, law enforcement organizations have very strict rules on how, you know, data can be accessed, who can have access to the data, down to the point of whoever's administering the data center has to be checked as well. And so, you know, private data centers for communities of law enforcement customers and that sort of thing is sort of one way to go about it, so that you can certify those people and the systems and the physical security, the software tools and whatever, so that you can actually meet those standards. And I know, like the DISA requirements and other requirements that are coming down, Microsoft and Amazon have both been super active in, you know, trying to anticipate the standard and getting ahead of the game to get their systems at the maximum levels that are reasonable. You know, at some point you may hit a wall, but organizations are, you know, constantly trying to push the boundaries of what's possible with cloud. And
in direct answer to the narrow question, you just have to do it. I mean, in some level, we have to work agency by agency to get FedRAMP certified with a known scope. We have to layer our 853 compliance or FedRAMP list compliance on with that agency. Now, the nice thing about FedRAMP when it works is a lot of that evidence creation, the next agency has a slightly easier time. But we can get some general JAG approval and things, general oversight, but yes, you have to define what is the compliance scope, what are the set of controls that we're managing, get the control evidence up, layer it onto the agency and take it forward. So in that specific case, there's no way around it. You have to go do it.
I just want to take 1 second, if I could, and just show you one of the outputs of some of the work we've been doing, which is providing some very focused resources for exactly this audience here. We call it the legal and compliance community. And, you know, one of the challenges we've heard from folks is, you know, there's just so much information. I find it hard to find what I need. I need to find out which standards apply to me in a particular industry and that sort of thing. So we've built this new part of the Microsoft Trust Center for the legal and compliance community, just to let you know. And if you just do a search for Microsoft Trust Center, it'll take you to this place. But here we have an open letter from Brad Smith, which, you know, he reaffirms, you know, the commitment to this community of helping resolve the issues that you have and challenges with compliance. And in fact, I think you have printed copies of that letter in there. We also have resources and certifications. So, you know, for instance, if you want to see what certifications are available for, and I think we still have a live connection here. No, maybe not. So I'd invite you, when you have an internet connection, go visit this. And you know, we have news and events, so we actually track news as it happens during, you know, in the day, publish that out to the site. So if you want to see what's happening, and you can do it filtered by different attributes. For instance, regional news, if you're in Europe and you want to see what's going on in Europe, or if you're in a particular industry, you want to see what's happening in Europe and financial services. Yeah, it looks like we don't have an internet connection. So anyway, go check that out. You can also get to it by going to microsoftcloudassurance.com.